Coming up, despite the damning contents of a Sue Gray report, which, by the way, was a long way from being independent, the convict at number 10 has not resigned and clearly has no intention of doing so. That will come as absolutely no surprise at all to anyone with the slightest knowledge of Johnson's narcissism and his career of lying hypocrisy and a willingness to throw colleagues and subordinates under a bus in order to protect his own skin. I don't think him resigning over Partygate was ever likely to happen. But outside of a general election, the only other way to remove the self-styled big dog and put an end to him dry humping the leg of the electorate is through a vote of no confidence triggered by the Parliamentary Conservative Party. In other words, the convict remains in power purely because of ministers and Tory MPs defending his lies, fatal decisions and immoral behaviour. In this video, we'll be talking about these Tory enablers. Stay tuned. After a great deal of thought, I've decided to find the time to carry on making these videos until this rotten, corrupt and incompetent government finally topples. Unfortunately for me, what this means is I have to follow British politics far more closely than I choose, and I have to tell you that some days it gets really depressing to observe the ongoing cultural vandalism of a government whose primary aim seems to be to destroy national assets like the NHS, the justice system, and latterly Channel 4, whilst at the same time making politically partisan appointments to public bodies like the Arts Council and the BBC, and through Brexit removing first our rights to freedom of movement across 27 countries, and subsequently our right to clean rivers and coastal waters, the right to protest on our streets, the right not to be tasered by special constables, the right to be protected by standards governing the quality of our food and the very air that we breathe. Yes, some days it's really tough to deal with all this. So that's my long-winded way of saying I really appreciate you hitting the like and subscribe buttons and clicking on the bell for notifications of new videos every Saturday. It really helps make it feel worthwhile to make these videos. We've all heard the bluster from Johnson. We've all followed his proffered narrative that 1. All COVID guidance had been properly followed in number 10, 2. That there were no parties, 3. That, okay, there may have been parties, but he didn't know about them, 4. That he wasn't at these parties that he didn't know about, 5. That he was at these parties, but he didn't realise they were parties, 6. That they weren't parties, they were work events, which, by the way, still wouldn't have made them legal, 7. That he just popped into these parties that weren't parties and didn't realise that they had developed into parties after he had left. 8. That he'd only stayed for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or that it was in his own flat and wasn't investigated by either the Met or by his subordinate, Sue Gray. 9. The fixed penalty notice was a technicality and he paid it and said sorry, so let's move on. And 10. That he takes full responsibility for the whole Partygate saga. Empty words, of course, because he's not taken full responsibility. Full responsibility would have meant resigning, having misled Parliament and broken the ministerial code. He hasn't resigned, and he's taken responsibility for nothing. His apologies to the House of Commons and to the nation are insincere. We know that because after his initial apology to Parliament, he retired to the Backbench 1922 committee where he told colleagues that he didn't mean a single word of what he'd said, that he didn't do anything wrong, prompting the resignation of Brexit hardman Steve Baker, whose idea of Christian forgiveness is that it is given only to those who truly repent, which Johnson clearly didn't. As an atheist, it might sound a little bit strange for me to say that the first time I've ever applauded Brexit hardman Steve Baker is because he is stuck to his Christian principles. But fair play to him, given he thinks that the collapse of Johnson may well lead to the collapse of the absolutist Brexit he holds so dear. The disappointing thing is, he's one of only 12 Tory MPs who have publicly stated they've submitted letters of no confidence. 13 if you count Christian Wakeford, who's defected to Labour. Though some reports say that we may only be a handful away from the magic number of 54, it still seems that it would be very mathematically difficult to reach that threshold for various reasons. So the only thing that the Partygate inquiry achieved was a non-apology from Johnson and the dismissal or transfer of a bunch of civil servants from Downing Street, and the further toxification of the Met Police brand as they admit a disinclination to pursue senior politicians. And that so-called independent inquiry? What a joke. Apparently, the meeting that the Convict at number 10 called with Sue Gray in the days before her report was published may well have been to get her to remove the section about the party in his own Downing Street flat. At the end of the day, Johnson is Sue Gray's boss, and we know he'd do anything to protect his own skin. But I want now to look at his enablers, because without them, he would be long gone. The cut and paste feel of many of the tweets emanating from his cabinet is to me redolent of insincerity and political positioning. Let's take a look at some of them. First, from his Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic the Turnip Raab, he of the beach cocktails while Kabul fell. The Prime Minister has apologised. True, many times, but there's been no contrition. QV Brexit hardman Steve Baker's comments from earlier. And is implementing all Sue Gray's recommendations. Yes, so far as they affect management structures and procedures in Downing Street. But Sue Gray stated that the matter of what disciplinary action should now take place is outside of the scope of this report and is for others to consider. Given the fundamental problems with leadership that she identified, where is this action against Johnson? Raab continues. Now we need to get on and deliver for the British people, growing our economy. But you're a Brexiteer, Raab. Brexit is shrinking our economy by 4% per annum, far more damage than wrought by the pandemic. Funding the NHS, always chronically underfunded during Tory administrations, with much of the funding now being handed to private service providers who take a hefty slice in profits. And cutting crime. Well, violent crime and sexual offences are now at a higher rate than pre-pandemic levels. Delivering for the British people my arse. Next, the Chancellor, Rich Kid Sunak, says he's grateful to Sue Gray. I bet he is. And he repeats his apologies for the event he received a fine for. That's telling, isn't it? He didn't apologise for the event before he was fined for it, only after he'd been found out. And that's what makes all these apologies so ridiculous. They're only apologising once they've been found out. If they were sincere apologies, they would have been made before the fines, not afterwards. I hope we can now move forward. By we, he means the whole British population of 67,200,000 people that should move forward. But how can we when the narcissistic convict at number 10 still clings on to power? Rather than 67,200,000 people moving forward, can I suggest that just one person moves forward? To a career of after-dinner speaking with his tousled hair, crumpled suits, and a newfound freedom to make sexist, racist, homophobic and Islamophobic remarks to a receptive Tory audience. Next, the thinking man's pob, Michael Gove. Weirdly, he didn't tweet himself, but just quote retweeted Chief Secretary to the Treasury Simon Clarke. Sue Gray's report documents unacceptable behaviour, blah blah blah. The PM has apologised. But if that behaviour is unacceptable, Mr Gove, why do you then suggest we get behind the PM? Because he has apologised? But we already know that the apology was insincere, which just leaves what you call his unacceptable behaviour. So why should you or anyone else get behind him? And those economic challenges ahead, they're made a lot worse by your government's policy on leaving the single market and customs union, the highest tax burden on individual taxpayers since the 1950s, and the real terms reduction in universal credit and other benefits. Liz Cut and Paste Truss, so called because of her amazing ability to cut and paste the terms of EU trade deals when striking new British trade deals, but just with the terms slightly altered to the UK's disadvantage. She's in a real environment here, cutting and pasting Conservative Central Headquarters' main text. The Prime Minister has apologised. True, but he clearly didn't mean it. and taken responsibility for the mistakes that have been made. Has he though? In what way has he taken responsibility? I mean, other than saying the words, "I take full responsibility," how exactly has he taken responsibility? In the last few hundred years, when any minister, and especially a prime minister, has said they take responsibility for mistakes, these words are then followed by the words, "and therefore I resign." Let's be clear, despite what he says, the convict has taken no responsibility whatsoever. It's not what you say, it's what you do that counts. Dim Lizzy then goes on to say, "I back him 100%. Well, of course you do. Why? Because you know that if Johnson goes, then so do you, Raab, Sunak, Gove and the rest of you. Because not one of you incompetent, UKIP-leaning, mediocre politicians would ever be appointed to cabinet positions by any competent Prime Minister. If he goes, you all go. Next, Priti Patel. Nothing from her at all. Her Twitter feed is just filled with Rwanda and anti-immigrant rhetoric as usual. Business as usual for our Home Secretary. Interesting, but I'm not sure what I make of that. I wonder if any of you, my viewers, have any thoughts on this one. Why couldn't she just do what James cleverly, the only Mr. Man who doesn't live up to his name, has done, and just rephrase that generic text from CCHQ, as of so many others? So look, the point I'm making is that Boris Johnson won't resign. Short of a general election, it's only his enablers that can force him out. And those closest to him know that with him gone, there is no way they personally will be appointed to any competent Prime Minister's cabinet. So by protecting him, they protect themselves. That's why the Cabinet are trying so hard to keep their parliamentary foot soldiers on side by these united messages of support for Big Dog. But now we can start looking forward to the by-elections in Tiverton and Honiton and in Wakefield, which may well spook those Tory backbenchers to such a degree that they may see the light and suddenly develop a moral backbone where they decide that Johnson's behaviour really is unacceptable, because unless it's in their own interests, Johnson's enablers will never get rid of him on moral or ethical grounds. It's all about self-interest. That, my friends, is the Tory way.